This is a question that comes up quite often. Someone takes on the role of executor, they start dealing with the estate, they begin paying for things here and there, and quite naturally they start to wonder, am I actually allowed to claim this back? The short answer is yes. In most cases, you can claim expenses, but there are some important boundaries. Not everything you spend money on will be recoverable, and not everything that feels like work counts as an expense. So what I'll do is walk you through what you can claim, what you can't claim, and how to approach it properly. The first thing to be clear about is this. Expenses are not the same as being paid, and that's where a lot of confusion starts. When we talk about expenses, what we mean is this: money that you personally spend while carrying out your role as executor. So if you've paid for something out of your own pocket, and that cost was necessary to administer the estate, that's what we're talking about. It's not a reward, it's not income, it's simply making sure you're not left out of pocket. Let me give you a simple example. Say you need several copies of the death certificate. You go and pay for them yourself, maybe £50 or so. That's a straightforward executor expense. You've paid for something necessary, and later you reimburse yourself from the estate. That's exactly how this is supposed to work. Let's go through some common examples. First, probate-related costs, the application fee, copies of the death certificate. Then you've got general admin, postage, printing, stationery. Travel is also very common, visiting the property, meeting professionals, going to the bank. And then property-related costs, insurance, maintenance, house clearance. Finally, professional fees, solicitors, valuers, accountants. Now let me give you a more involved example. Let's say the deceased owned a property that's now empty. As executor, you arrange insurance, a locksmith, and a basic clearance. You might spend hundreds or even a few £1,000s. That's completely normal, because those costs are necessary to manage and protect the estate. But compare that to this. If you decided to fully renovate the kitchen to increase value, that's where it becomes questionable. So it's not just about spending money, it's about why you're spending it.
If the estate includes a property, this is where costs can really add up. You may need to maintain the property until it is sold. That can include utilities, council tax, and insurance. Basic security is also important. Here's a real example. An executor takes over a property that is empty for 6 months. They continue paying electricity, minimal usage, council tax, and insurance. This is all necessary to keep the property safe and compliant. Those costs are generally recoverable from the estate, but it's important they are kept reasonable, no unnecessary upgrades or overpayments. There are lots of small expenses people forget to claim, things like parking at solicitors or properties, mileage for travel, printing documents, postage, phone calls related to probate. Individually, they're small, but over a 12 to 18-month probate process, they can add up significantly. Here's a practical example. An executor visits the property 10 times over several months. They pay £6 to £12 parking each time, fuel or train fares, small printing costs. That's all legitimate, but only if it's recorded properly.
The key word here is reasonable. Expenses should be reasonable in amount and necessary for the role. So, for example, standard travel, fine. Basic upkeep, fine. But anything excessive could be challenged. Here's a situation I see quite often. An executor needs to travel regularly. They could drive and claim mileage, or take a standard train. That's all fine. But if they consistently book expensive or first-class travel, that might be questioned. A helpful way to think about it is, would this make sense to someone reviewing it later? Because beneficiaries can question expenses, and if needed, a court could review them. Now, this is where many executors get caught out. There are things you generally can't claim. The main one is your time. Even if you spend hours on paperwork, days clearing a house, weeks dealing with banks, that time isn't an expense. I've spoken to executors who say, "I've spent over 100 hours on this, surely I can charge something," and it's completely understandable. But legally, that time doesn't count as an expense. You also can't claim inconvenience, stress, or lost earnings unless the will specifically allows payment. Executors are not usually paid. Just because something takes time doesn't mean it can be charged.
Now, it's important to understand what happens if expenses are excessive. Beneficiaries can request a full breakdown of estate accounts. If something looks unusual, they may question it. In serious cases, expenses can be reviewed by the court. Here's an example. An executor claims unusually high travel and hotel costs without explanation. Beneficiaries challenge it. The executor may have to justify each expense or potentially repay amounts. So transparency is always your protection.
Expenses are typically reimbursed from the estate, so you may pay up front and then recover that cost once funds are available. Here's how this usually works in practice. Early on, you might pay for probate fees, travel, securing the property. At that stage, there may not be estate funds available yet, so you keep a record. Then later, once funds are accessible, you reimburse yourself. So being temporarily out of pocket is quite normal. It's very important to keep clear records. That means receipts, invoices, notes explaining each expense. I recommend using a spreadsheet from the start. Track date, amount, what it was for. Let me show you where problems happen. An executor pays for lots of small things over time, but doesn't keep proper records, no receipts, no clear list. At the end, beneficiaries ask for accounts, and suddenly everything is being questioned, not because it's wrong, but because it can't be clearly supported. Clear records don't just help, they protect you. Most of the time, expenses aren't an issue, but when problems arise, it's usually because something wasn't explained, something seemed excessive, or records weren't clear. Here's a common situation. An executor arranges a £2,000 house clearance. They don't mention it to beneficiaries. Later, someone questions it. Was that really necessary? Now, even if it was reasonable, it creates tension. Compare that to simply explaining it up front. You don't need permission, but transparency avoids suspicion.
So, the simplest way to think about it is this. Executors can claim expenses, but only if they are necessary, reasonable, and properly documented. If you step back and look at all the examples, they all come down to that. If you're acting as an executor, having a clear structure makes everything much easier. So I've put together a free executor's checklist. It walks you through what to do, what to track, and how everything fits together. You can download it using the link in the description. And if you'd like clear, practical guidance on probate in the UK, feel free to subscribe.